Hello, welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions. I'm Debra Maldonado.
I'm Dr. Rob.
I'm with Creative Mind, and we are here to bring you the best of Jungian depth coaching in a wonderful way that's accessible to people.
Yeah, we've been talking about family and how shadow plays into family relationships.
Yes, last week we talked about the mother-daughter relationship, and as we promised, we are going to talk about the father-son relationship in this episode. But before we begin, I do want to remind you, do us a favor and subscribe to our channel on iTunes or Spotify or any of those wonderful podcast services so we can get more people listening to this podcast and getting this information. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the father.
Yeah.
It's very, very, for daughters, it's, that's a whole other subject. But the father-son relationship is also very powerful.
Yeah, we wanted to focus on the father-son, and then we can talk later about the father-daughter, perhaps, and the mother-son relationship as well. So the archetype of the father is really interesting because just as the mother is the primary relationship that we have as children, as we come into the world, she is our lifeline. Mm-hmm. She protects us, cares for us, nurtures us, feeds us, on and on, right? That relationship imprints strongly in our psyche, and we carry it with us as a template of how we are going to see the world and what we can expect from the world. Powerful imprints. The father, on the other hand, is more abstract because he represents life outside of the family home.
And more like power and influence and career.
Authority. So if we think about institutions, how they kind of represent the father energy out in the world, that's part of the archetype of the father. Now, individually, what Jung says is that our individual experience with our father, of course, plays into the way we see that larger archetype or the larger patterns of society that pertain to the father archetype.
When you think about father, think about religious figures that are male, political figures that are male, kings, through humanity, there's always been the king. So the father archetype has run through all of human experience. And then we have that on the social level, the grand level, and transgenerational level, but also in our personal life. We have this father that we project all those collective ideas about father onto him when we're young, especially for the boy, because he's the same sex as the father. So almost like there's kind of, he learns more from him of how to be a man.
Yes, and we were talking in general, right, the way Jung kind of taught it. And of course, now the gender issues are very different, and we're flexible in coaching people through those processes.
Yeah, so if you're a gay son, it still applies, but it can be more complicated. Or if your father's gay, and there's something more complicated about like the roles, the typical roles. Yes. But so there's always exceptions.
Yeah. Yes, but it's still the basic principles are really flexible and apply in a beautiful way where we can help people understand the dynamics of their familial relationships with the parents, especially. So here, we're talking about power, not in let's say in the absolute sense of physical strength or financial power, but more psychological power. Like who has the power in the family? Not always, right? But often the father is the one that carries the power in the family. So as a male child, we need to acquire that power in order to build up our persona.
I know we think about all the traits that we learned from our family, and as we talked about in the last episode, that you want to, the things you liked or like that fit for you, you picked as your persona, the things you rejected. But with this situation, this is another layer to it, is that there's two operating principles of the ego. The first is to survive physically, and the second is social survival. So it always becomes secondary, the social survival. So if you think about, power has a huge impact on the ego's development, because it's trying to be safe and be in the world at a safe place. Socially, yes, those are all issues of being accepted and loved, but physically safe is really a very, very powerful imprint that we get from our parents of who has the power. So the mother may have the power in the family, and that might not be as relevant. And there could be complications if the son sees the mother having power and the father not, maybe wanting to take it on and not wanting to repeat the pattern of the father, right?
Yes, it becomes let's say, a complex system, but here we're focusing on the relationship with the father and the son, right? So the father naturally wants to pass on the mantle of power to the son, right? He's the prince, something like that, symbolically. Now, at the same time, the male child has to create their persona, to create a persona so that they're strong enough to go out into the world and feel, I have an identity, I have a power to do the things that I want to do. But the shadow is really interesting in this dynamic, because if the father has not integrated their shadow,
which most fathers haven't, yeah.
Yes, they often project it onto the son. So their fear, for example, of failure, they're very concerned, right, that their son might fail, and therefore they put a lot of pressure on the son to not fail, and which creates the reverse of the intention, because then the son feels suffocated, controlled, and wants to break free.
And I really see this when I was first starting out coaching. I saw a lot of my male clients, the fathers are really successful, and they won, and they were like almost like competitive and like driving the son, where it almost becomes critical, where you can't fail, you have to be the best, and that almost like it's coming from a place of, I want my kids to succeed, but from an ego sense, the father doing that is actually trying to make up for his own things that he hasn't reached yet, or if my kids fail, that's a reflection of me, and they may not even be conscious of it.
That's right.
And so then what happens with these men I've worked with is they were coming to me for success because they couldn't figure out why they couldn't get their businesses off the ground, or couldn't, really succeed in life with relationships. And it was all from that father, putting all that pressure on them, that they wanted to rebel. And like purposely fail. They would say, I just want to purposely fail to just piss them off, because they're so mad at the pressure that they received. And sometimes it's conscious and sometimes it's not.
Yeah, that's a good point. Most of the time, I would say it's unconscious. If let's say shadow integration requires a very conscious intention, and then it requires really focused effort to do that. A lot of people think they can do it through journaling or through a weekend retreat or something like that. That's not how it works. It really requires kind of a focus on their individuation process. But the main idea here is that the unresolved shadow of the father, if the father does not integrate their shadow, is simply passed on in some form or another. The son will do one of two things. They will either accept the shadow into their own unconscious mind, so they're replicating the unintegrated shadow of the father.
So they're creating a persona just like the father and repressing the same things that the father repressed.
The same thing, exactly. Or they rebel against that and play out the shadow in their persona. In other words, they're playing out the father's shadow in their persona.
Which triggers the father, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if the father has repressed their creative side, their spontaneous, kind of rebellious side, maybe the son might play that out in his persona. And in the shadow then is the conservative family man who does everything right.
Yeah. And so sometimes too, religion, if the father's really religious and he's like forcing that onto the child, either the son becomes just as religious as the father, or he rebels again. And like you say, that there is a natural aspect of wanting autonomy as a child. You want to break away from your parents. You want to rebel. It's natural for, especially teenage years. They want to break away and become their own.
Yeah, it's part of the natural individuation. So we all have the natural inclination to break free from the parents, right? Even as children, we start to kind of crawl away or toddle away from our parents as much as possible.
And they want to do things themselves. Don't help me. I'm going to do it myself. And
yeah. But this is the larger landscape of our psychology where we need to be independent. We need to find our own identity, build our own life, all that.
And it's complicated too, because that's why it's called a complex, the father complex, is because you love your family and you want to be in your family, but you also want to be independent. So there's a lot of conflicts that the son, he wants to please the father, but he also doesn't want to be controlled by the father. And so that it plays into it as well.
So a lot of people that we work with tell us, well, what if my father was not around? What if that happens? What happens to me? So this is where the understanding of the archetype comes in. That it doesn't matter if you have a physical, biological father in the house. The archetype will be fulfilled through the male figures that you identify with. So it could be the grandfather, the uncles, cousins, mentors, bosses sometimes that you have that mentor you and guide you. They fulfill that function. And it's the same psychology, essentially. Your relationship with then the archetypal father becomes the way you experience that protective element, the exertion of power in the world and your ability to do things in the world.
So if you had the, so quote unquote bad luck with a father lottery and you feel, I'm never going to have power because my father didn't, or he wasn't there, or he was critical or withdrew, like he could be there and not be emotionally available. That's the beauty of archetypes, because we don't have just our personal experience to draw from to create our life. And that was Jung's really gift to psychology, is that most psychologists talk about your personal life, how it shapes you, and then you just kind of, have to rearrange everything or come to terms with what happened to you so then you can sort of create some freedom and conscious direction in your life. Where Jung is like, there's so much possibility in the collective, and you can draw on other forces in the psyche that are not necessarily experienced through your personal experience in life, but you can experience them as an adult through individuation.
You're right. That is the power of this model, because you're not a slave to your fate, to your circumstances. You're free to really create yourself or recreate yourself consciously, because you're dealing with these internal structures or these archetypes that we all have. We're born with them. They're innate in us. Therefore, no one is missing anything. You can always recreate that relationship with the mother or the father in a powerful way and gain all that power that you need from these powerful archetypes.
And that's the power of the archetypes, is that I think about the personal history is such a small sliver of who we are. That ego is like a bubble on the top of a wave, on top of an ocean. And most of us spend so much time psychoanalyzing this little bubble in our childhood. And meanwhile, there's like this huge, vast resource of unlimited potential in us. And we have the matrix, the templates for all of these to become whoever we want to be.
Yeah. I think that the personal narrative often helps us understand why we approach life in a particular way.
Like our default.
And why we've taken certain attitudes towards life. And in doing that, then it serves as a springboard for then asking ourselves, if I had a choice, right? If I could do it consciously, how would I create my life? And that gives us that power in relationship with the archetypes that No other system really provides this kind of flexibility and workability.
And so the father, as the authority and protector,
Mm-hmm.
uh, he really shapes the son's ability to have power and responsibility.
Yes, that's at let's say the basic level, right? First of all, you need personal power to go out into the world. If you don't feel that powerful,
Like a
or what people
secure, like you
call,
feel secure, right?
yeah, what people call confidence, self-esteem, drive,
Mm-hmm.
ambition, all that comes from the father archetype,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not that the mother doesn't contribute to that, of course she does, but it's a different kind of archetype that Jung identified.
So you're saying we're born, if we're born with the archetype, we're innately born with power and the ability to have
Yes.
confidence. And it's just our relationship with our father on a personal level that kind of shrinks that based on that relationship, that potential.
Well, yes.
It like hides the other, our true power sometimes if we don't have that healthy, relationship with power with the father. Or the father, maybe he's insecure and feels like the world is out to get him, or he doesn't basically show the child, the son, what it means to be in power. Maybe, a great, I know that you always love movies and shows, but in Better Call Saul, the Breaking Bad, the son looked at the father, and the father was always like getting swindled. And so he was like, he worked in the store, and the guy came in and ripped him off. And he was like, "You either a sheep or a wolf." He said, "You decide who you're going to be." And there was like, he put his father's kindness in the shadow and became more of a criminal, even though father was such a good man. And so it's like they wanted the power. And so you wonder why people do bad things. It's like like they learn that power, like there's almost like a dysfunctional way of what power is. Power is taking responsibility, taking advantage of people, or power is like being ruthless, or power can be love, and it could be helping others, and it could be being a leader in a movement to change the world. I mean, it could be used in different ways.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, the situation is interesting because in society you have a narrative of physicality that you need both parents in order to be a healthy human being, right? That's the narrative. But that's not necessarily true from the Jungian model of the psyche. What Jung was saying, we're born with these internal archetypes and we can draw the energy from within ourselves. So he's saying, yes, socially, of course, that narrative is useful, and it helps us become or express our full potential as human beings, to have a mother and a father, and that we're treated well by them and we have good relationships with them. Of course, that helps us. But he says, if we don't have those things, or if our relationships are not as optimal as they could be, we can still draw upon our internal archetypes and have even more power, or more resilience and more psychological stability than if we had, the ideal
Almost like you're
parents.
saying that just having a father that's powerful and teaches you good morals and it loves you so much may not be the ultimate, because if you have that template of the father archetype, you're forced to do that. There could be even more potential. Another
Yeah.
thing too that we talked about before the show is that, and I noticed it with the mother archetype and the father, is that even if your mother or your father weren't there for you the way you wanted them to be, there was always someone around that fulfilled that role. Like a grandparent, for some people, it's a boss at work. So even in the physical world, there is this other person that almost like for some reason organizes itself to support you if you really look for it, right?
That's right. In my culture, in Latino cultures, the extended family is really important. I, I I grew up with my father early on, but my uncles, my grandparents, my grandfather were really role models for me as to what is a father figure. Uh, so it's I think it was built into society, or it used to be built in, that you had these extended family members that could support you, even if your biological father wasn't around, or you didn't have the best relationship with him.
And usually the grandmother raises the kids while the mother's at work. I mean, there's all a community, or the other women in the group, or the fathers come in and take in. So yeah, it's like a whole culture. And in the more European families, the families are a little more tight and isolated from the other cultures. There's neighbors and things like that, but not that open community like in some culture. And there's other cultures that all over the world that are like the Mexican culture.
Yeah, that's right.
But like I said, it's weird, right? That there's always someone there. Like women I've worked with that had terrible mothers. They're terrible mothers, but the grandmother was so wonderful, you know. And I'm like, but I love my grandmother, and it's like, use that as your mother archetype. Like there's someone in your life, and it might not even be a relative, that you can look at for that guidance if you need that physical apparition for the person.
Yes, and then of course in the coaching model, the coach can often serve as a mentor.
Yes, absolutely.
As a father figure as well.
Because so many men that our male coaches that graduate our program do men coaching because they didn't have that figure.
Well, not only that they didn't have that male figure, but
they need to do the archetypal work.
Yeah, it's a unique process to go through individuation. In other words, I don't really see fathers, even the best ones, right, with good intentions and that they're present and emotionally connected. I don't really see them doing individuation with a child, right? Yeah. Individuation is a unique psychological transformation, but definitely I do see coaches doing that.
And can you describe how the father archetype can be a guide, like that father figure as a guide for individuation for someone? Like what is that like for a son, a young man,
right?
Or a man at any age?
Yeah, so just like the mother archetype at the cosmic or at the universal level represents the physical world, you know, the physical manifested universe for us. The father archetype represents the spiritual, unseen force in the universe, right? That's why often in some spiritual traditions, the Great Spirit is a father figure. So what it's saying, essentially, the archetype is that it's the connection to our spiritual life. If we are not connected to that spiritual essence, then we often feel that all we have is this physicality, this body, this individual life,
even this history, right? That makes us who we are.
Yeah, and that we're not connected to the larger cosmic play that's going on.
So, for example, someone could have a great father, and then they become a great father, and they're, being a good father, and they're living their life, and they're working their job and supporting their family and doing all the right things. But then they're missing out on that spiritual life. Like they feel this kind of a sense that there's something more than just this material world, that they need to connect with something deeper within themselves besides just being the father figure. And I think that's a lot of people say midlife they are doing a job because it provides for the family, but then they feel pressure that they have to keep it up because they it keeps everyone financially stable, but then they want to do something else, and then they feel this challenge of, I need to be a good father, and if a good father doesn't go off and do what he wants to do or pursue his dreams.
Yeah, and here by spirituality we mean not necessarily religion, but an individual connection, right, to universal principles. That often is what drives people to individuation, because there's if let's say people that are not connected to it, or especially for men, nowadays, if they're not connected to their archetypal spiritual father, they feel a sense of emptiness because that archetype is the one that gives you meaning. What is the meaning of your life? What is the purpose? So often we think the purpose is in the profession or the work that we do,
or being a father, being a good. My purpose is to make sure my kids grow up and they're taken care of and that they feel safe and protected.
Yes, and of course there is something to that.
Yes, but it can't be the only purpose.
Right. The internal connection comes through that internal archetypal relationship that you have with the father figure at the archetypal level. So that provides the internal meaning structure for your life and your purpose, or what people call purpose. If you're seeking it outside yourself, right, in the material elements of your life, your work, the number of children that you have, your family structure, those are all good, but they're not going to give you that solid spiritual foundation that you need.
Now, that can be very high concept for people, the spiritual foundation. Can you give something like a practical way to explain what that is, or what that is like for someone who has that?
Yeah. So if you think about emotions, they give us the sense of the meaning of our human experiences, whether it be work, relationships, our health, our mind, body, or our spirituality as well. In other words, what is our purpose in life? So the work that we do internally in connecting to the father archetype, it connects us to that source of meaning.
And so it's like a feeling, emotion that's like a passion that they get to connect with, that's beyond just a passion for being in the material world, your role in the world. It's like a passion for like your truest self.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Because if you think about physically, what are we doing? Yes, we can look at symbols of success, like money, abundance, big houses, cars, or status in our job, right? Or the family, like you say, having a nice family and having kids and all that, they are all symbols of a successful life. There's nothing wrong with those things. If the internal structure is not there to give you meaning beyond those things, in other words, not only those things, but an internal drive for the true meaning of your purpose, of why you do things. What is the motivating factor in your life? If it's simply to create these structures so that it appears that you're doing everything you're asked for or asked of from society, then Jung says that's an empty life. Essentially, you're playing the roles that are asked of you, but you're not really doing them from an internal motivation. You're doing it from an external motivation.
So everyone sees I'm a good father, that I'm doing good, my wife is happy with me, all those things. Now, I have a question just popped to me about this whole concept of the father archetype and sons, because we know there's been a lot of talk in the society about these young men that are not, getting married. They're kind of staying at home. They have almost like they're not dating, and they're kind of feeling isolated from women. They're not taking on and stepping into that father role. What do you think, from a father archetype standpoint, is that person, or those young men, what are they struggling with, and what do they need? And then they tend to look at like cult-like figures to they can fall into cults and idolize like power, like strong men to kind of connect to, and it kind of turns into this unhealthy relationship with power, and then they don't really have their own, almost like projecting their lack of power, so they borrow someone else who appears to have power in the world.
Yeah, Jung talks about this internal need, right, that we have to connect with our own internal the father complex within, right? In other words, if you think about the God archetype, what is that? It's a father figure, but it's internalized. It's your motivation from within you. If you don't have that internal structure, then you tend to project it outwardly onto powerful politicians or institutions or authority figures,
or falling into like the religious cults. We see a lot of men say, "Oh wow, like I don't know why I got caught up in that."
Yeah. So,
or even like sometimes it's getting caught up in just making money and kind of trying to find power through money and
that's it.
Opportunity that way, but not in a good way, kind of like a cutthroat kind of way.
Yeah, just like the mother archetype has positive and negative aspects to it, the father archetype has positive and negative associations with it as well. So the positive, of course, is that it provides the law, a structure for your behavior in society, the authority of higher principles, of higher knowledge. The negative aspect or the negative father complex would be that it can turn into over control, authoritarianism, the police state, the dependence on external governments, or even violence, right? And those kinds of behaviors that we see in society.
And do you think these men didn't have a good role model, or do you think they rejected the role model? Like, it could be both, right?
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen is that in modern societies, there are not those ritualized kind of points of transition from one phase of our life to the next. So that we're often left on to our own devices to find out for ourselves, how do I live my life? How do I use my power in society and my influence in a creative way? And we know that people that feel disempowered, they don't feel they have a voice in society, then they instead of using their creative power, they use the destructive power in order to assert themselves in some form.
If I can't create, I have to destroy. Yeah. So this work is so powerful for both men and women to work with their mother archetype, father archetype, and vice versa. Men still need to work on their mother archetype, and women need to work on their father archetype, because there's a lot of stuff about, toxic masculinity and patriarchy and all that. And we have to understand that those are just, just projections of our own in, untapped archetypal power that we have. And we seem to think that something out there is creating it. And we can basically take responsibility for our life and reclaim that power. And I love this idea of Jung's work, is that you get to, even if you had the sorry lot in the beginning of life, you can always have an opportunity to become who you really are. Jung said that I'm not what happened to me. I can choose who I become. And that's really this idea of the psyche having this collective element, and these archetypal elements helps us tap into and transcend our personal history so that we can really truly create our life from our true self. And that's what this coaching is all about. It's really powerful.
Yeah, a lot of our students tell us, why isn't this being taught in school, right? Early on for children, because imagine the ideal, right? That the father is individuated or has the support of someone who helps him individuate. Then they pass on that internal psychic structure to their children. In essence, they're communicating to them, your task is to individuate yourself, and supporting the kids in doing their own internal work.
And a good next step for you, if you're interested in exploring this more, is to think about what did I learn from my father about power? What did I learn from my father about authority and about love and emotion and all those things? And how did I develop my persona to either align with his persona or to align with the opposite, what he pushed away?
Yes, and remember that it's never too late. It doesn't matter if your father has passed away or he's never been in your life. you can still do this inner work and change the relationship that you have with power, with money, with success, with society in general, because even your spiritual life will change, because it's an internal structure, it's an internal journey that's what Jung called individuation.
And one last thing is that, just thinking about this, that when you ask those questions, think about it when you were younger, we project so much onto our parent and make all these assumptions on who they were and how much love they have, how emotional they are, because they had to put on a persona to us too. And then we also have our opinions. And if you ask your siblings, they probably have all the different answer to those questions. And so remember that nothing is really solid. It's really all interpretation, and that we can always change that interpretation and also tap into those archetypal forces within us to create new relationships with power and authority, and also that father leadership.
Yes. Yeah, and this is the future of coaching. This is where it's heading, and this is the power that it's going to have for people that are willing to do internal work. It's going to give them the ability to transform their past history, essentially, and transcend their past conditioning.
Yeah. And we do have a free gift for you if you are interested in going a little deeper. The introduction to shadow work for aspiring coaches. It's actually for people who want to be coaches and want to train in this work as a Jungian coach. Just a little introduction to shadow work, and not the father archetype, but I think it's just interesting to go through and explore for yourself to see if this type of coaching would be a great new thing for you to learn. All right. Well, take care, everyone. We'll see you next week on another Soul Sessions. Have a wonderful day.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.